Happy holidays, everyone. No matter what you celebrate, I hope you're celebrating well. I hope you've been enjoying some tasty seasonal drinks, such as hot cocoa if you're a normie, eggnog if you're an enlightened super chad, or hot cider if you're banned from several states and most of the European Union. I hope you've been jamming out to some Christmas music and haven't once had to hear Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul McCartney. And I hope you've been enjoying the BCC vs. JAS feud on AEW Dynamite, now in its 4th consecutive year. This year, I'm privileged to be able to celebrate the holidays in a fun and interesting way with some of my fellow wrestling video creators, namely, this fine group: Chris O'Brien, CherryChase, Andos, Joseph Montesilio, and Nova. Check them out in the description. Chris came up with the idea to do a Wrestling Secret Santa thing on Twitter. We each drew names and then DM'd the creator we drew a match of our choosing to cover in a video. The others decided to call it Secret Santo after an old meme from the Pro Wrestling Only forums, and Andos's girlfriend, Puzzled Orca on Twitter, even drew these awesome thumbnails for us to use. So, welcome to my Secret Santo video. My name was drawn by CherryChase. Cherry is a video essayist who has covered a variety of different topics on his channel, including wrestling. If you haven't seen his work, I highly recommend it, especially his Anatomy of a Match videos if you're specifically looking for wrestling content. The match that Cherry gave me is the main event of Ring of Honor's first show. The Era of Honor begins. The three-way dance between American Dragon, Low Key, and Christopher Daniels. This is a pivotal match in the history of independent professional wrestling in North America. It set the course for nearly the next 2 decades of indie wrestling. Its effects rippled throughout the industry, reaching from the smallest Legion halls to, eventually, the Superdome in New Orleans for the main event of WrestleMania. A true classic. And I'd never actually seen it before. Aside from a couple key matches here and there, I'm not super experienced with pre-2004 Ring of Honor. Considering how much Ring of Honor I've watched from other periods over the years, this is kind of a wild blind spot for me, honestly. Well, there's no better time than now to fill it, and no better match to fill it with. Before I review the match itself, there's a lot of history to contend with. This is the match that basically kicked off one of the most popular and historically significant indie wrestling promotions ever, after all. So, to start, we've got to take it all the way back to 2001. On April 4th, ECW went out of business, leaving a guy named Rob Feinstein in a serious pickle. You see, Feinstein was the owner of ECW's main home video distributor, RF Video. With ECW's closure, Feinstein was left without his best seller and needed something to replace it. After trying and failing to become the distributor for hardcore promotion Combat Zone Wrestling, Feinstein decided to fill the void by founding his own wrestling promotion with a few of his associates. The most important of these associates was Gabe Sapolsky, a Paul Heyman protege from the ECW days. Sapolsky would be made head booker, and under him, the unique identity of this new company, known as Ring of Honor, would take shape immediately. Despite his hardcore roots, Sapolsky wanted to eschew hardcore wrestling in favor of something more unique. He wanted to create an independent wrestling show rooted in the spirit of sportsmanship and honest competition. Thus, Ring of Honor's Code of Honor was born, a series of rules that the competitors have a moral obligation to follow, if not a physical one. The Code of Honor has been retired once and revised a bit over the years, but the basics and their hold over ROH's shows have remained the same. They are as follows: shake hands before and after the match to show respect to your opponent, or be a jerk and don't. Fight on a level playing field. and respect the officials. Hardcore matches that were not governed by the code would be saved for the endings of heated feuds. In an American wrestling climate dominated by the crash TV mentality pushed by Vince McMahon, Vince Russo, and Paul Heyman, this was a pretty novel concept. Ring of Honor's debut show, The Era of Honor Begins, was set for the 23rd of February, 2002, at the Murphy Recreation Center in Philadelphia. The match between Eddie Guerrero and Super Crazy for the IWA Puerto Rico Intercontinental title was probably their biggest attraction, but they made the decision to make the main event a three-way dance between some rising indie talents instead. These were indie wrestling veteran Christopher Daniels, also known as that guy who wrestled Rhino in ECW that one time, and two rising stars who had been feuding with and even teaming with each other from coast to coast, American Dragon and Low Ki. Interesting choice of main event. Let's see if it pays off. The day of the show finally came. The announcers were Eric Gargiulo, a CZW announcer, and Mr. Wrestling 3 himself, Steve Corino. The undercard was filled with a lot of the East Coast indie mainstays of the time. And because of that, the show itself as a whole isn't the most auspicious debut for the company. Most of the Era of Honor Begins is barely okay. Not particularly worth watching. The phrase one-match show gets tossed around a lot when referring to various wrestling shows, and this is like a 1.75 match show. Unfortunately, the worst thing on the show by 1,000 miles is the opening segment. The first Ring of Honor match ever. In history, the thing they chose to kick their company off with is an impromptu squash match in which the Hit Squad destroys the Christopher Street Connection in exactly a minute. If you're familiar with this period of indie wrestling, you probably cringed the moment I brought up the Christopher Street Connection. If you're not familiar with them, well, their entire gimmick was LOL, we are gay. And because this was the early 2000s, they were heels. They made out in the ring, sexually harassed and assaulted their opponents, and came out to Village People songs. Gee whiz, I wonder why Tony Khan couldn't get the ROH archives on any streaming service but Honor Club. On this show, the Connection cut a promo about how ROH stands for Ring of Homosexuals, and then they made out, and then they got killed by the Hit Squad. Then their manager, Allison Danger, got put through a table while Gargiulo, Corino, and the crowd screamed slurs and bayed for their blood. Gargiulo tried to say that this is not about bashing anyone and that this segment is about honor. Bullshit. This segment is about how beating up gay people and women is totally awesome. Irredeemable trash. -9 out of 10. First negative score I've ever given anything. And it doubly sucks because this is down in the history books as the first Ring of Honor segment ever. ROH made such a big deal about being a more grounded and honorable wrestling show, and its first show opens with that. I hope that everyone involved with this segment is ashamed of it. I was going to make a joke here, but no, I think it's best not to undercut the sheer awfulness of this with humor. This segment is enough of a joke on its own. A sad, sick one. The rest of the undercard isn't blatantly awful like that was, but it's still only okay. You've got a couple singles matches up front. Amazing Red versus a very green Jay Briscoe, and Xavier, rest in peace, versus Scoot. Scoot Andrews. Seriously? That sounds like a name that Vince McMahon would have given Roderick Strong if he'd called him up to Raw. Anyway, they're both fine. There are 2 tag matches, couple familiar faces in these, but they're basically nothing. There's an aerial elimination 6-way match. It's Red again, Quiet Storm, and then 4 guys I've never seen before. This was just a bunch of dudes flying around the ring, hitting each other with moves, and barely selling anything. There was no real hook or drama to speak of, other than tag team partners eliminating each other, and they didn't really do anything with that at all. Oh, and then Prince Nana squashes a guy with a towel gimmick. I won't rate most of the above because they're all super nondescript. The stuff outside the ring isn't great either. The promos are mostly pretty awkward except for the post-main event promo. The commentary is fine except for the blatant homophobia in the first segment. Carino hadn't yet evolved into the decent announcer that he'd later become. The production quality is ass ugly. It's filmed in standard definition with what looks like nasty early 2000s consumer-grade digital cameras. The crowd's mostly hot throughout with only a couple dips. They love this stuff, but the audio is terrible, as expected. Overall, for the most part, this is just your average East Coast indie show from that time period. But now, for the good stuff. The .75 I mentioned earlier is Eddie Guerrero vs. Super Crazy in the semi-main event slot, which is a good little match with strong work from both that sadly ends just as it gets cooking. Thus, it feels like 75% of a truly excellent match. You don't have to go out of your way for it or anything, but it's definitely worth watching for Eddie Guerrero completionists. Or Super Crazy completionists, if those exist. I'd probably give this match a 7 out of 10. And then, finally, there's the main event. Christopher Daniels, Bryan Danielson, billed as the American Dragon, and Low Ki. This match absolutely rips. Holy crap! This is unbelievable. This is in a completely different galaxy from everything else on this card. This is the moment when these 3 men truly arrived. This is the North American indie wrestling template going forward. This is Ring of Freaking Honor. This whole thing is just constant action, bell to bell. It's not as relentless as that other more famous 3-way that Daniels was a part of in TNA, but it's close. It tells you exactly what kind of match it's going to be up front, too. Near the beginning, the 3 tease a 3-way test of strength at the start, but then Dragon breaks it up with kicks. The whole thing breaks down into a strike-off between Dragon and Ki, which then culminates in them elbowing Daniels and then chopping him down to the mat once he charges in. This is a pretty good way of showing the heart of this match up front. No long feeling out processes here, just non-stop vicious strikes, holds, and throws, with their attempts sometimes clashing with each other in beautiful, messy ways. And their work looks excellent, across the board. There's a real sense of struggle and urgency here. They blow through some spectacular spots at an amazing pace, but they're not rushing through them. They give them just enough time to breathe, and for the most part, do a good job of making them look like they took effort to pull off. This is even more amazing to me, because the work between the 3 of them is all so different, and yet they reconcile with each other so well. Daniels immediately stands out. Commentary sells him as a 10-year veteran. Technically, it was 9 years, but hey, don't sweat the small stuff. It definitely shows in his wrestling. He's the most conventional pro wrestler of the 3. He uses mostly typical pro wrestling strikes, fairly typical power moves, a few typical pro wrestling holds like the Boston Crab and an abdominal stretch, albeit in creative ways, and his patented best moonsault ever. He bumps with a snap and a precision that the other two don't quite have yet. But he's not above the other two, he's just different. Dragon and Low Ki, on the other hand, are much more similar to each other. They're both heavily influenced by martial arts, both sports and film. Both also move with an unrefined explosiveness and kick with a ferocity that Daniels doesn't have. But they are different from each other too. Dragon hits hard and can do a hell of a suplex, but his bread and butter are his holds. His first instinct is to take an opponent down to the mat, twist and snap their limbs, and try to lock in a hold. He's scrappy and no nonsense. It's amazing how fully formed his act is this early on, and even more amazing how much he would expand on it later. He's clearly one of the best wrestlers on the independent scene at this point in time, but still very early on his journey to becoming the greatest professional wrestler of all time. His work is impressive, but not flashy, which is interesting compared to Low Ki. Low Ki is a force of nature in this match. His strikes, throws, and even his holds are high impact and flashy. His kicks and chops look great. They're executed with the degree of over-the-top showiness and mugging facial expressions that the other two don't have. Even his selling can be a scenery-chewing performance. He does a lot of these extremely goofy but totally awesome poses, and the crowd love them. There's this one part, too, where Dragon is twisting up Daniel's arm. Then, Ki kicks Dragon to get him off, goes to grab him, and pointedly steps on Daniel's back along the way. It is the most low-key thing ever. He is unbelievably cool in the nerdiest way possible. He's like a fighting game character or an antagonist in a Hong Kong action movie. He's such a unique, singular wrestler. He throws his entire being into this character, and it rules. It's to the point where I'm not even sure it's a character. It might just be him. Like, I would buy him going into a restaurant and ordering and eating with that exact same flair that he wrestles with. He is so exaggerated and theatrical that he loops back around and feels totally authentic. It helps this match that the other two feel authentic based on their characters and history as well. And that brings me to the heart of the match, the character interactions. There isn't an over-the-top melodramatic capital S story in this match. Rather, there's something I find even more interesting in a setting like ROH, an extremely well thought out character dynamic, one that stems organically from the clashing of their histories and their wrestling styles. Take Daniels. He's the veteran in this match. Right away, he proves to be very good at fighting the two less experienced guys at once, picking his spots and exploiting both of their weaknesses when it comes to positioning and ring awareness, even attacking Low Ki while he's posing at one point. This eventually forces Dragon and Low Ki, who are rivals as well as an occasional odd couple tag team, to team up against him. This team up / rivalry is illustrated perfectly by this spot. Now, Ki snapmares Dragon down and kicks him. This makes Dragon big mad. He stands up and does the same to Ki. So yeah, typical snapmare kick battle that would later be done to death, right? But then, Daniels gets up.
That's the question right now.
I don't think it's Christopher Daniels.
Oh, Chris Daniels is going to find out.
That's not how you do it. An American Dragon, just 20 years old. Low Ki, just 22 years old. Just using Christopher Daniels like a kicking bag in a dojo. And the two of them just seem infuriated at this point.
Everybody's on their feet except for Christopher Daniels. He's the only one that's not appreciating the kicks that have been given to him by American Dragon and Low Ki. Oh!
And he got it from both ends. Christopher Daniels even starting to beg off, asking for a little bit of mercy at this point.
Oh!
And that could just break the shin.
Did you hear that? I'll be surprised if one of them doesn't have a broken shin.
Absolutely. Low key down, the American Dragon down.
This integration of their intense rivalry, mutual respect, and flippant disregard for the entire existence of Christopher Daniels is all so well thought out and so organic at the same time. I do love a good capital S story, as you can see from the Secret Santo match that I gave Joseph Montesilio, but you don't need it. All you need to do is to ask some simple questions and come up with interesting answers. Who are these people? What is their history? How do they wrestle? How would their styles and personalities clash with their opponents? To me, the answers to these questions are the most compelling parts of professional wrestling, and even this early on, Daniels, Dragon, and Low Ki know exactly how to answer them. You take the great performances and the great storytelling, and you've got something special alone. But on top of that, this match just whips so much ass. It's a hyperkinetic action movie in a ring. It's so full of cool feats of athleticism and physical ingenuity, but it doesn't feel empty or overblown. Here, let me show you. Lightning round. Things that I loved in this match that I haven't mentioned yet. I love Daniels' combination of the Boston Crab and Camel Clutch and how it's quickly broken by Dragon. I love this abdominal stretch to Dragon by Daniels on the top rope. I love how Ki goes up and then does the hanging dragon on Daniels, but then has to break it quickly because it's painful for him too. For once, I loved the Tower of Doom spot, especially Daniels doing a belly-to-back superplex as part of it. I love this kick from Low Ki into a blue thunderbomb from Daniels on Dragon. I love this.
20. And how about the Misawa-style knife-edge chops coming from the American Dragon? Looks like he's setting up Christopher Daniels for some kind of an Oriental Scorpion, but it looks like it's a different version as he's chicken-winging the two arms of Christopher Daniels.
Oh, that's got to be painful. Between the shoulders, the hamstrings, the lower back. Oh, and then the American Dragon's thigh.
And Low Ki, what an offense. Those kicks are just absolutely brutal and lethal with the background that he has in martial arts. You can put all of that weight behind those kicks, and that's got to hurt.
And they're lightning quick. And look, Dragon still has Christopher Daniels' leg. So every time that Low Ki is kicking the American Dragon, Christopher Daniels is feeling the pain too.
Christopher Daniels, of course, you've been in there with him, you've trained with him, you've rode with him. What drives a man like Christopher Daniels in a match like this?
He wants to be known as the best wrestler in the world. And in my opinion, he is. But you know what? Until he's up top of the Ring of Honor and these fans believe he's number one, in his mind, he's not.
And American Dragon going back to those submission maneuvers.
I'm not even going to try and analyze what happened there. It rules, though. I love this lariat from Daniels. This isn't a spot, but I just generally love how little guy sleeps on the outside while two guys have a mini match spots there are here. So much of this match is the three guys fighting each other all at once, and that's hard to do. Props to them. I loved the finish. Danielson locking in the cattle mutilation in perfect range of the ropes was a good fatal mistake to set up the finish. Ki getting to the top rope and Phoenix splashing Dragon and then immediately hitting the Ki Crusher on Daniels for the win was impressive and smart. It ends the match on the two most impactful moves in it. What a concept! Honestly, the only knocks I can give against this match are that there wasn't much room for long-term selling, and that the positioning and the setup for spots were sometimes a little contrived. This is most noticeable in the otherwise excellent finish, when Dragon locked the CM on Daniels in exactly the right position to get splashed. That doesn't bother me at all, but It's a little convenient, so it might bother someone. Overall though, the more I watched this match, the better it got. This is an absolutely brilliant piece of work from all three men involved, both athletically and in storytelling. And it featured none of the gross ignorance, stupidity, or stereotypical indiness of the undercard. It was pure and well-intentioned. Gargiulo called this match the best match he's ever seen before it was over. And though I personally don't agree with that and think that ROH would definitely top it down the road, I can believe that he thought that. I can understand why he and others would think that. And that's a pretty high compliment to give a match. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. Only stopping from giving it a 10 out of 10 because ROH would so far exceed this match later on. But this was it. This was the moment when the things that these three excellent pro wrestlers had been working on for the past few years coalesced into something truly special. This is the beginning of modern independent pro wrestling. The terrible stuff that opened the show, none of it mattered. It would eventually fall by the wayside, while the style codified in this match would become the nucleus that the rich, illustrious, and often turbulent history of Ring of Honor was formed around. Ring of Honor continued gaining notoriety for the next 2 years, steadily building a roster of the best wrestlers on the independent scene. They'd even reach a talent-sharing agreement with another burgeoning promotion, Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. However, in 2004, Rob Feinstein would hastily exit ROH. I wonder why he left. Why? Wrestling people! Why are you all into kids? Unfortunately, Feinstein never really disappeared from wrestling entirely. His disgusting ass has continued slithering around the business for years, selling signed merch and conducting shoot interviews. At the time, though, this controversy set East Coast indie wrestling on fire. It caused TNA to pull their contracted talent from upcoming ROH shows, including AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels, both ROH mainstays at that point. This didn't last forever, but it did mark the end of those wrestlers appearing for the company for a while, and it was a big black mark on ROH. In the wake of all of this, financial backer Kerry Silkin purchased Feinstein's stake in the company from one of his employees. Under Silkin and Gabe Sapolsky, the company would enjoy its most critically successful period. Some truly classic storylines stemmed from this period, such as the Summer of Punk, the wild interpromotional feud with CZW, and Bryan Danielson's feud with Takeshi Morishima. Sapolsky would stay on as the booker until 2008, when he left the company and was replaced by Adam Pearce. He'd later go on to found Dragon Gate USA and Evolve. Silkin would be ROH's owner until 2011, when they were purchased by Sinclair Broadcasting. Over the next 11 years, the company would see its greatest popularity up to that point, but would also suffer the worst from a problem that plagued ROH from the beginning: its wrestlers leaving for larger companies such as WWE, TNA, and later AEW. ROH management could load their roster with as many of the finest wrestlers in the world as they wanted, but the promotion was always a stepping stone, never the final destination. All three men in our match are evidence of this. Low-Key, Daniels, and Dragon would all leave ROH behind, even when it still needed them, and go on to varying degrees of success in larger promotions. ROH would also suffer from poor management and promotion under Sinclair. The combination of these problems tanked their attendance in the later years and eventually led to Sinclair temporarily shutting them down and ending all of their wrestlers' contracts in December 2021. AEW CEO Tony Khan would then purchase the company in early 2022. Interestingly, on the night he announced his purchase, he would have Bryan wrestle Daniels on Dynamite in a really fun tribute to this match. Definitely watch it if you haven't. Very good match. In general, though, after Khan's purchase, ROH's future still remains uncertain. Will the new weekly show and upcoming pay-per-views on Honor Club take off? Who knows? I can only hope that Khan learns from what worked in the past, but also keeps a firm gaze toward the future, like Dragon, Daniels, Low-Ki, and Sapolsky did back then. In conclusion, Ring of Honor has had a wild history. Daniels versus Dragon versus Ki was ground zero, the template, the foundation that its entire legacy was built off of. The stuff surrounding it may have been rough. What came after wasn't all roses, and the future is still uncertain. But even so, Ring of Honor was a very interesting promotion at its height, one that produced a lot of excellent pro wrestling. And we have this match to thank for it. Well, that's it from me. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you to the other participants in Secret Santo, and special thank yous to Chris O'Brien for coming up with the idea and CherryChase for giving me this match. I'd love to do this again next year. I had a ton of fun with it. And again, happy holidays, everyone. I'll see you next year.